The Ohio Theater is one of the most important landmarks in all of Columbus. It's also one of the only examples of Baroque architecture that you'll find in the Columbus area and also in Ohio. It's just Baroque architecture has never been very popular in the States just because it's really a European invention. It came from the Reformation. It stems from European creativity and the advancements of the Renaissance era. So it's just never been really relevant to American architecture like you would see French Nouveau or Victorian or neoclassical. So the theater was designed by a Scottish architect named Thomas W. Lamb. He really wanted to separate all of the patrons, I suppose, from their daily lives and create a sort of fantasy where they could escape to. It was also furnished by New York decorator Anne Dornan, and she was a really cool lady. She traveled all over the world, and she took a lot of the inspiration of the decoration from her trips to Africa, which you can see that in some of like the little intricate details of the leaves when you get inside of the, and you can see all of the columns and all of like the vines coming off of the columns, all of the gilded vines. It's really interesting to see how her travels play out in the architecture or in the interior architecture of the building. It was originally designed as a movie palace, which is sort of a place where like the wealthier citizens could watch all of these like new silent films in luxury, because it was built in 1928, I believe, and this was like at the very height of the Jazz Age. So this is where people finally had enough money to spend. You had recovered from World War I, and all of the wealthy people would now want to show off all their wealth, so they would want to go to these big luxurious movie theaters where they could really be separated from like all of the poorer, less dignified citizens that would be at like the traveling picture shows, which used to be the only form of silent movies that you could go and see. And these films were a lot different today. First of all, they were accompanied by a full orchestra projected on a giant screen. You would have intermissions where you could go and socialize and refreshments would be served. The first film that was ever showed there was The Divine Woman with Greta Garbo. And in addition to the movies, it was sort of a removable screen, so they also had performers, some that came and performed. Oh, yeah. That performed on the stage. And these include really big names. Buddy Ebsen, Jack Benny, Ray Bolger, Ginger Rogers, who is one of my all-time favorites. In the late 1940s, when you sort of get past World War II, that's when things really start to decline. Which is weird, because like nothing really declined in around like the 1930s and the Great Depression, which you would expect it to. But no, people still wanted their movies. It was in the 1940s when you have television and drive-thrus and teenagers, where teenage culture really becomes important, that no one wants to go to the stuffy, fancy movie theater. And so they still continued to show movies, but it just was never the same as it had been. At this time, you see all of like the old movie palaces really start to decline. Lowe's, which was the firm that owned the building, they closed the theater on February 24th, 1969. And it really just kept depreciating in value, and it became sort of a relic of a bygone era, and no one wanted to buy it. If you see some of the pictures, it was pretty decrepit. And it was actually about to be demolished when CAPA, which is the Columbus Association of Performing Arts, decided to raise money and develop a plan for the future of the theater. And they started to hold live performances inside the theater to raise money, and really give the public a chance to see what they wanted to do with the theater. And they wanted to completely erase the movie palace aspect of it because no one wanted to go to the movie palaces anymore. Instead, what they wanted to do was use it completely for live theater, because what Columbus really lacked at that time was a large main stage. Well, we had theaters, but we didn't have large enough theaters to really house all of these traveling shows that were becoming really popular. Also, during this time, the Columbus Symphony Orchestra was looking for a new permanent home because, once again, there was nowhere large enough to house them. And so they really connected, and that gave Kappa the idea to really start it as just a theater, a large stage, really, for symphony performances, opera, for ballet, and for, of course, the national tours. And now it's the main stage for most of the higher end entertainment in the Columbus area. So that's where Ballet Met performs, that's where the Columbus Symphony performs, where the Met Opera in Columbus has their main stage. Of course, we have other theaters. We have the Palace and the Lincoln, but they tend to be for the smaller productions, and the Ohio is what we really use to house the best productions, or not necessarily the best, but the largest at least. It also has a lot of cultural significance just as a whole, because that's still where a lot of people go to sort of connect with the theater, to connect with, live performances, to get away from like movie screens and television screens, from cell phones and iPods, and really just experience live theater, to have a sort of visceral connection. Now to the architecture, that side of things. So it's really what you would call Mission Spanish Baroque, where if you look at the outside, it's very square, but it has a lot of rounded shapes placed on the square facade. And that sort of comes from the when the Spanish came to the New World, all of like the missions that they would build to convert the natives were in the Spanish Baroque style. And so it sort of took on a Latin American and at the same time European feel. And so that's what you get when you see the front facade of the Ohio Theater. And once you get inside, it becomes really beautiful because the Mission side just fades away and it just becomes this opulent sort of Spanish Baroque feel. And that's sort of one of the sticking points of Baroque architecture. Usually it won't be the outside, which is the most beautiful, it will be the inside, because Baroque architecture was really focused on making these beautiful living spaces where it wouldn't just be a beautiful shell. It would really just be a great place to be and to spend time in. From churches to public spaces to palaces, that's really what you get into when you get into Baroque. Just these beautiful living spaces. And if you go inside the theater, you will be astounded because it seems relatively plain on the outside, but the inside is all red brocaded velvet and gold gilded columns, marble details, and throughout the entire building. You see a lot of themes from Greek mythology, and there's this large pediment right above the theater, and you can just spend hours just looking at all of the intricate little details, all of the little sculptures that really form this amazing picture and really bring you into the experience of the theater. Even though it's not necessarily real Baroque, in that it's not from Europe, it doesn't really express the traditional European Baroque that you would think of, the Roman Baroque or the Rococo that was really popular in France. I think it really expresses the ideal of Baroque, which is just getting an emotional reaction from anyone that would see it. And that's what makes the Ohio Theater so special, both as a Baroque landmark and a landmark in Ohio. Thomas Lamb, as you might recall, the architect who built it, often described it as his best achievement. And this is from a man who built theaters in New York, in all of the major cities in the U.S. But he described the Columbus, Ohio Theater as his best work. And I agree with him, because it's hard to imagine anything more beautiful than this theater, and anything that really expresses the ideal of opulence and Baroque architecture more than the Ohio Theater. So yeah, that's about it. Bye!